Okay, so let's take a look at our sandbox here a little bit, and let's talk a little bit more about annotations. We talked about inserting dimensions in here, and we're going to do that here in just a moment, but now we have a lot more views to put dimensions on. So I'm going to show you how to put in dimensions again, how to organize them again, but also move dimensions between different views, which you might find a little bit more convenient. Something to note here too is our feature manager over here. We have a lot of stuff over here now, so we start with the sheet and we go to the sheet format, which you're familiar with a title block and whatnot. And we have our different views. So we have our drawing views over here. It kind of highlights them in regard to like a green square over here. We have a drawing view 2, which is over here to the right view. So we went from the front view to the right view. And then we did our drawing view 3, which is highlighted into the green square over here too. So that's going to be our top view. Then from that we have a subview in here for a broken out section, or sorry, hinge plate. Let's go ahead and read that a little bit more. That's the part that's actually driving both of these views over here. Then drawing view number 4 and so on and so forth. That's our isometric view. Then we have our auxiliary view up here, which is our auxiliary view number A. Section view B, which is over here. That's highlighted in green now. Then our detail view C is over here in green. And our drawing view number 8, which is going to be our crop view, which is down here off of our left view. Then finally our drawing view number 9, which has our assembly inside of that. And you notice that just like with an assembly, when you're in an assembly, if you go inside of that assembly, inside of the feature manager, you're going to see all the different parts and all the features that drive that part, including sketches. So in this assembly we have, or inside this drawing view, we have the assembly. Inside of the assembly we have the parts. Inside of those parts are all the features and sketches associated with those parts. So it's all kind of condensed in here into this, just like an assembly would be. So that's the feature manager. Okay, so let's go to the annotation tab in our command manager and maybe talk about things from the left to the right. We're not going to cover everything here, but I want you to know at least some of the basics I think would be appropriate to know right now. So we talked about smart dimension real quick when we put together our right view over here with the break view. So we actually condensed that break. We actually made it a little bit smaller. We still put in that dimension using a smart dimension, so you still have the capacity to do that. And if it conflicts with some of the dimensions that actually drive the model, it's going to ask you if you want to drive that or not, or have it driven. So keep that in mind. That might happen every now and then. Model items, we're going to insert that here in a minute. Spell checker, you can check all the text in relation to our model. There isn't a whole lot there yet, but we could do that too. Format painter, I think we talked about that before too. If we want to do like perhaps take this layer here and maybe apply it to that that view title, we can do that over there too. And now it's going to put that on the appropriate layer. And we did that, I think, maybe the last video or two, so you might want to check that out there too. Notes section, we already have a note section over here for sheet notes, but if we want to add additional notes, we could do that too. Linear note pattern, we're not going to do that. That helps us organize some of the notes that we might have in there. Balloons, auto balloon, and magnetic line, we're going to cover that when we get to exploded views. Surface finishes, we're not going to cover that, and we don't need to call out any holes because a hole wizard does a pretty good job of that. So we're automatically going to put in a hole wizard hole call out. Geometric dimension and tolerance in this section, we're going to ignore that for now. We're going to cover that a little bit later. We're not going to do any blocks in here. And then center mark and center line, we're going to cover that, but we're going to ignore the area hatch fill. We don't need to make modifications there. And when it comes to revisions, you might want to think about that. If you need to revise your part in here, what you do is you put a revision cloud around that, and you put a leader on that. Then you have a revision table that will actually refer to that. But we're going to cover that in a different video. Tables, we're going to cover that too in other videos. So let's go back over here to model items. Let's go ahead and take a look at that. Kind of like what we did before. We're going to make various selections in here. So we're going to go ahead and choose those items in our sketches that are marked for the drawing. We're going to keep those. We're not going to include not marked for drawing, so we're not going to do that. We're not going to put in an instance count in here. So we're going to ignore that guy. And then this guy too, tolerances and dimensions, we're going to cover that later. Whole wizard profiles, no. Whole wizard locations, yes. And whole wizard callouts, yes. We're going to keep that. Annotations in here. We're not going to add any additional annotations, although if we want to put in surface finishes, datums, and GD&T stuff, we'd be able to do that too, and this would be the section for that. Reference geometry, we're not going to add anything additional in here, although I think the last time we added planes, which will come in kind of like a center line that you see over here. And then options over here, include items from hidden features. Don't want to do that, not now. And then use dimension placement in sketch. So wherever the dimensions sit in the sketch, it's going to go ahead and include that in that very same position within our model over here in the different views that represent that model. Then layer, we're going to make sure we do that on the dimension layer. When we do that, green check mark. Now it says no model item was inserted. Choose yes to change import from option to entire model and try again. So that's okay. If we go to yes, just puts them in there, puts them in on a dimension layer, and there we have it. Okay, so now it's time to kind of clean this up a little bit, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about dimension cleanup, except for maybe moving some dimensions around. I'm going to show you how to do that, and how to put in center marks and center lines too. I think you will find that to be helpful. But you know, the typical scenario where we want to move dimension leader lines around to make sure that the leader lines do not cover or intersect with lines that would represent the edges of our model in here. You want to make sure that they're off that model. So when you have a situation like this where you have a portion of that red line which is going to appear to be a gray line over that model line, you want to make sure you move that off. And if you have offsets in here, just real quick, you want to move that off here. And situations like this where it doesn't really quite go to the end, you want to make sure you take the end point of that line and get it close. Not on it, but get it close. So with that said, and I'm going to let you go ahead and do your own dimension cleanup here, of course. Let's take this dimension and move it. We have a lot of stuff going on over here in our top view. But we could take that dimension over here on this top view and maybe take it down here to this bottom view. Instead of doing a smart dimension and putting it down here, we could actually move this dimension and it still maintains its relevance in regard to being able to drive the model, because you could change these dimension values in here which come from sketches and actually help it drive the model. So we can make that a 5-inch dimension if we wanted to do that. But let's take this dimension with the shift key, select it, and drag it down here to this view. So now we have it down here. Do a little bit of cleanup, take that off, it's way off over the side of the model, and then bring this one up over here too. Take this dimension out, let's increase the precision on that like we did before, and take that leader line and pull that out here too, so it's not touching the model at all. So that's how you move dimensions. Let's say we want to move this whole call out over here to someplace that isn't so darn crowded. We can take that and perhaps move that over to our detail view, but because it's on a different view besides a detail view, I don't know if we're going to be able to do that. I don't know if we can shift that and put that down here, and I don't think we can put that over here too, because this is probably the first point that we selected for that whole wizard hole. But we can actually do a whole call out. I said we weren't going to cover this, but if this is not going to cooperate, let's go ahead and do that. Let's go to whole call out. And if we click on the edge of that hole over here, kind of gives us that very same notation. You want to make sure you put that on the proper layer, and we're going to call that our dimension layer. We could actually call out that hole that's down here too, so we have kind of like a countersink down here too. So again, we can go to whole call out and actually click on maybe that edge. Now it shows us the angle, that countersink in here. And again, we can put that on the dimension layer, and if you want to keep the dimension layer active, we can probably do that. So now let's go ahead and keep that dimension layer active in case we want to add additional dimensions. And of course you want to swing that around so it's attractive, so it doesn't get in the way of other things in here too. So that's how you move dimensions. Try the shift key, you move the dimensions from one appropriate view to the other. We cannot move this 4-inch dimension over to this view over here, but we can move this dimension over here to this view over here if we want to do that. You just have to make sure that the dimension's in a proper perspective before you try to move it. So this one over here, we're going to go ahead and bring that out. That's going to be 4 inches. You notice it's got that break in there too, which is all part of that break view. And then more and more dimension cleanup. But I'm going to let you do that on your own. But essentially what I wanted to show you in this section of the video is how to move dimensions around. Okay, so I went back through the model and actually cleaned things up a little bit, moved some dimensions around, and took care of some view titles to make sure that they're in the right position over here. So it's kind of like a constant thing sometimes. So one thing to note over here, we want to put everything on the right layer. We talked about the section line not really being cooperative. We'd really like to have that on the dimension layer. If you do that, try to put it on the dimension layer. We don't have it over here in the properties manager. The definition of that line kind of disappears. So kind of up to you whether you want to do that. If we were to take this auxiliary view line 2 and try to put that in the dimension layer, not only just doesn't put it on the layer at all. I think it's on that layer. But the definition of the line stays, but the color of the line doesn't change, so that's a little problematic. Our detail, sketch that we have in here, that actually changed, and that did okay. So that's on the appropriate layer, and it's got appropriate letters. And if you want to change your letters in any of these, if they're out of order, if you continue to add details, it's going to continue to add letters onto that. So you might want to reset that if you want. So if you want to make that instead of C, you want to make that D or G, that could be done too. Make sure they're capitalized when you do that. So it not only changes here, but it also changes up here too in regard to the notation. When it comes to sheet notes, sometimes when you first start putting sheet notes in here, you want to add some additional notes and add some items in here. We'll just put in some letters in here. Initially, it's not going to let you, you can type forever, and it's going to continue going out. The box is just going to continue to stretch. And you might be tempted to go ahead and put a return in here, which is going to put it on a different line. That may not be a good solution. So the thing to do here is actually get out of that text box and then come back to it, double click on it, and then you can condense it. First time you do that, you can't do that. Second time you do, you can do that. So I'm going to go ahead and delete some of that stuff. What else do we have in here? We put in our view titles in here in the proper locations, move some dimensions around to the proper views, change some of the display styles in various views over here, especially this view over here, our left view over here, in order to show what's behind it, so I could actually put a dimension in place. Also went ahead and put some elements into into the model that we have in the background, the hinge plate. I went ahead and defined some of the properties over there so it actually populates the title block. And then finally, now that we have all that stuff done, we want to make sure we put everything else in the proper layer. So here we have some center marks. Center marks just define where the center of holes are going to be. Kind of creates a little bit of a target so we can see it. You might want to take that out and bring those out a little bit, but it's also best to be able to put that on the right layer. So we're going to put that on the dimension layer too. This center mark, we're going to put that in a dimension layer. There's a couple other ones in here too. So here's one more down here. So to put in a center mark, because they're not always here, if we want to put a center mark on this one, what you do is you go up here to the Annotation tab on the Command Manager and go to center mark and just define a circle that might define where that hole will be, and that's where the center mark's going to be put. Once you have that in there, and then you can go ahead and stretch that out if you want. If you want to take those lines and pull those out a little bit, kind of make it a little bit more defined. And you might want to take some of your dimensions now that we have a center mark in there and actually bring that out a little bit so it doesn't interfere with the center mark. Center lines might be helpful too. So if we have, let's say, an item down here, maybe we want to show that there's actually going to be something that goes right down the middle of that, like a hole. And we might want to take that view and maybe show that in a different display style. So if you go up here to display style, maybe show hidden lines visible. We could do some center lines there. So what you do with the center lines, you just define, again, just like with the center mark, like the diameter of what that hole might be and what it's going to do. And you get to define that by clicking on two lines, or if it knows a hole is already there, just clicking on one of those hidden lines in the background is enough to do that. And once you put that in place, now you can actually stretch that center line out a little bit. So there's a center line in there, so I'll make sure I'm going to get out of that. But what we want to do is kind of stretch that out a little bit beyond the model. That's always appropriate to do. So you notice I put a center line in for each one of these cuts that we have in here. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's go ahead and take this last one in here and stretch that out a little bit. So a little bit closer, let's go ahead and choose that center line in here and drag the endpoint of that out. And we might want to take that center mark out of there and just get it out of there for the moment. Stretch this out a little bit, and then we can put that center mark back in there. So we can pre-select that, go to center mark, bang, it puts that in its place, and I just do a little bit of cleanup to make sure it looks good. And then we'll go from there. So that's what you want to do. That's kind of like the final round here in regard to dirt drawing cleanup. Get your dimensions cleaned up, put things on the right layer. You want to make sure all your view titles are in the right place. You make sure you have enough space between all of your views. It's all fairly consistent. And lastly, you want to make sure that all the elements in your title block are filled in. So at this point, you should have a drawing that is not only attractive, but is easy to read and communicates your design intentions.